Michigan coordinator for the Ron Paul campaign. In my department here, we have an election coming up tomorrow, so there's a few important details I want to go over with everybody to make sure that we're on the same page. And in fact, beyond this room, I need you all to make sure that every Ron Paul supporter in Michigan is on the same page on some important facts. Number one, I'm sure as Ron Paul supporters, most of you have heard about the fact that a lot of these recent states have been holding straw polls when what actually matters is the delegate counts that come out of those states, and the media is not necessarily always honest about the results of what's happened, and really if you look at the delegates, it looks more like we're in second place. That is not a straw vote. Our primary tomorrow does bind the delegates for their first round of voting in the National Convention by district. So it actually does matter that we do as best we can in the primary tomorrow and win as many districts in Michigan as we possibly can. So that means turnout, 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 getting every possible vote on election day. You may have also heard that we had a closed primary. That's how it was actually announced when the Republican Party set the rules. They said it was going to be a closed primary. Turns out that was also a deception. That's not true. We have an open primary in Michigan. For the record, you can vote in the primary. So, your duty as a Ron Paul supporter is to make sure that no voter is left behind, that everybody is aware of this process, that people realize that they are eligible, if they're eligible and registered to vote, they can vote. And I see a lot of young people out in the crowd tonight, so I know you guys are pretty tech savvy. If you are standing in front of the computer when you do this, you can go to michigan.gov/vote. And as you're calling voters, you can actually just get their birth month and their zip code and their name, and you can look them up and tell them where their polling place is, where they go to vote, let them know that it's 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. tomorrow, and make sure that every Ron Paul supporter votes for Dr. Paul on election day. That's how we win this election, is turnout, turnout, turnout. To make a list of everybody in Michigan you know. And I mean, it's funny, but it's true, everybody, and not just the people you associate with on a regular basis these days. I mean people you went to high school with, people you used to work with, people you're in the service with, everybody you know, even people who might not necessarily fully agree with you on everything in politics. And you write down this list, you make this list, and you call them on the phone. And you ask them one simple question, and it depends, how much you know about the political persuasion of the person you're calling, but you say something more or less like this. Hi, Joe, it's Adam. I know we haven't spoken in a while. We have an election in Michigan coming up tomorrow. Just wanted to see whether you'd be casting your ballot for the phony conservative Rick Santorum or the phony conservative Mitt Romney, or the true American patriot, the champion of the Constitution, Ron Paul. They need to vote for Dr. Paul on election day. And use Twitter! If they're undecided, make sure that you give them the information they need to make the right choice. And that means listening to them and reaching out and showing them how Ron Paul is the candidate on the issues that matter to them. To them. And if you happen to hear something along the lines of, well, there's this important contest between Mitt Romney and Rick Santorum going on here, and Michigan's kind of you have my permission to point out that there's not really a dime's worth of difference between the two candidates, and it really doesn't matter which one of them might win Michigan. All it really matters is whether or not Dr. Paul is winning delegates out of Michigan, and that if they believe in the Constitution and believe in liberty, they should be voting for Dr. Paul on election day. And they want to vote for Rick Santorum just because they think it's nice for the sake of mischief. Kindly remind them that a vote for Rick Santorum fundamentally is a vote for Rick Santorum, and they should be careful what they wish for, because you never know. Okay, well anyway, thank you so much for being here. Now that we have all those important announcements out of the way, I'm really proud to have for this program that we have tonight. We've done 5 campaign appearances in Michigan in the past 3 days, each one really focusing on one aspect of Dr. Paul and his candidacy that really show that he is truly the people's choice for this country to compete with Barack Obama and prevail on election day, November 2012. And that's been a rally for soldiers, airmen, and sailors for Ron Paul. On Saturday night, that was a rally for small business owners for Ron Paul. On Sunday night, that was 2 rallies today. One was at Michigan State University. A little nice reminder that if you're under 40, chances are you're voting for Ron Paul, and that's sort of important if you're trying to run up against the president. And we had a special event in the Little Rock Baptist Church in inner city Detroit tonight. And I guess Reverend Holly really put it best as to why we did this. He said, why don't more people come to inner city Detroit? And that's an important point, I think. I think it's important that Dr. Paul shows that he's someone who's truly a man of the people. But now tonight we have a very special presentation. This is Doctors for Dr. Paul. So here to tell us more, please welcome Dr. Hussein Sagir.
It's really a great honor to have so many people here tonight. For Doctors, for Dr. Ron Paul. Let's give the doctors a round of applause. And you know, there are probably 10 to 100 doctors here, so I'd like to just have them stand up really quickly, just so we know who the doctors in the house are, and medical students, please. Great honor to have so many people. You know, before I introduce Dr. Ron Paul, I have a special guest for us tonight, just to send his greetings, just from the Arab American community, and that's the publisher of the Arab American News, Osama Sablani. Please welcome him to the stage.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Dr. Sahir. And thanks to all the doctors that are here. Did they stand up already? Okay. And thank all of you for coming on such a cold night to make this the best and the warmest campaign in Michigan. And thank you, ASU, the Arab Student Union and the University of Michigan, for doing such a wonderful job. You know, the Arab American News came on Friday endorsing Dr. Ron Paul for president. In Arabic and English. Because we believe that Dr. Paul brings to this campaign sense, sanity, and sincerity. He is the only candidate that brings us together while others are dividing us apart. He is the candidate that cares about America, the rest they care about themselves. To talk about who we were going to endorse, the question was mute. Ron Paul. We're not here as Arab Americans, we're here as Americans. That's why we stand today, all of us together for a good America, for the best America, for Ron Paul for president. As you know, elections we do not win in elections by becoming only emotional. Elections are won by votes and money. Are we going to vote tomorrow for Ron Paul? Thank you very much, God bless America.
go. Thank you very much, Osama. That was a really exhilarating, really great. So it's really a great honor to be among so many freedom-loving individuals who are here tonight, united for the cause of liberty. My name is Hussein Sagir, and I'm a fourth-year medical student at Michigan State University. And on behalf of the Arab Student Union at the University of Michigan Dearborn, I'd like to welcome you tonight. I'd like to ask the members and the volunteers in the crowd to stand up and be acknowledged, because really it was their hard work as foot soldiers in the cause for liberty that made this event possible tonight. I'm currently doing my rotations in the Henry Ford Health System, where Dr. Ron Paul did his internship in 1962. After, he served as a flight surgeon in the U.S. Air Force. Throughout his career, he delivered over 4,000 babies and continued to work even as a congressman, something that's not common these days from our congressmen and politicians. He opted to treat Medicaid and Medicare patients for free or at a severely lowered cost. Now, I think the name of tonight's event, Doctors for Dr. Ron Paul, is really appropriate because our republic is ill and is in need of the caring hands of a man who has sworn to restore liberty. Both Republican and Democrat, are addicted to spending our nation's treasure on foreign wars and expanding the military-industrial complex. Now, just a few nights ago, Rick Santorum basically boasted that he's been working for the past 8 years to promote a war with the country of Iran. At a time of mass propaganda and hysterical declarations from our politicians, what we need is a man who refuses to mislead America into another failed war, because he understands the ramifications are too great for the people of this country. I'm supporting Ron Paul because he's the only candidate with a responsible domestic policy. His support for civil liberties is really a breath of fresh air from the increasingly authoritarian and fascist rhetoric and legislation we have seen from our politicians. He is the only candidate who has stood up against the debasement of our currency, because our politicians in Washington don't care about the prospects of a viable middle class, and they don't understand that that's destroying the chances of an economic recovery in the United States. You see a lot of the youth out today, and that's because Dr. Ron Paul is the only one standing up against this severe debt, and at the end of the day, he realizes that it's us, the youth, that are going to pay it. And so that's why so much of the youth is out here, and so much of the youth votes for Dr. Ron Paul every single election that we've seen, every single primary election. Voted for President Obama, but they've become disenchanted. And you know, a lot of them have become disenchanted with President Obama, given his failure to fulfill his promises to close Guantanamo Bay, end the wars, and repeal the Patriot Act. Instead, we were given a continuation of the Bush policies and the NDAA, which allows the U.S. military to detain, arrest, and interrogate U.S. citizens and legal residents without trial under the pretext of counterterrorism. The President has declared the authority to order extrajudicial assassinations of American citizens, and Ron Paul is the only candidate who has opposed these outrageous violations of our Constitution. Party system, and that's why so many Democrats and independents are out here tonight. So before I introduce him, let me just ask you a few questions. Are you sick of the useless perpetuation of war and America's burden of being the policeman of the world? Yeah! Are you of the armchair generals deciding when and where our troops will go and die and for what corporations? Yes! Are you sick of the Patriot Act, NDAA, and expansion of the police state because you realize those who sacrifice their freedom for security will have neither? Yes! Are you sick of being forced to choose between being smacked by the right hand and smacked by the left hand every 4 years because you realize those who stand for nothing will fall for anything in Washington? Yes! Are you sick of the warmongering mainstream media? Yes. Acting like Ron Paul doesn't exist even though he's the most capable and qualified candidate? Yes! And finally, are you sick of the Federal Reserve printing this paper? If so, then please help me in welcoming the only man who can cure this sickness, Dr. Ron Paul.
I don't know if I have to give a speech. He did such a good job. I'll give you my 2 cents worth anyway. But I do want to introduce my wife of 55 years, Carol. Grandchildren here. Linda's with us tonight. What a wonderful evening and a wonderful audience. We spent a little bit of time today, traveling across the state, and the crowds have been big and enthusiastic. We just got Michigan State. I think they said there were 4,000 people there. Can you believe it? Translate this enthusiasm and get some delegates out of this state. That's but it is wonderful the reception we're getting, and it's across the country. And I think there's a real need for something different. And I think people are recognizing that the system that we've had, not for the past 3 years. I go after our president as much as anybody else. But it isn't the last 3 years that brought us to this crisis. And the last administration was far from my favorite, let me tell you. But it didn't occur there. It's occurred over a long time. Liberties aren't lost overnight. And we have changed our foreign policy, we've changed our monetary policy, we've changed our fiscal policy and our spending policy and entitlement system, the welfare state, and it didn't occur overnight. The freedoms that we have lost have been eroded, and it's gradual and steady. But now we're at a crisis point. There's not much more to lose because when a president announces that it can assassinate an American citizen and the Congress can give him the power to arrest all Americans anytime, any place without due process, coming desperately close to saying that we're losing, if we haven't lost already, our republic. So it's time to stand up. The American people are waking up. They're letting the message be heard. Unfortunately, Washington, most of Washington, other candidates, they're pretty much sleeping. They don't know what we're talking about. And I think the message has to be loud and clear and make sure they hear us. We went in the wrong direction at least 100 years ago. You know, that 1913 wasn't exactly a good year for us. Not only did we have the income tax thrown on our laps, something I would like to get rid of, I'd like to repeal the 16th Amendment. The advice of the founders and the very strong position in the Constitution about monetary issues. The founders said that because they had gone through runaway inflation with the continental dollar, they said that only gold and silver can be legal tender, and it's still on the books. It's been undebated. It also said that you couldn't print paper money. It said no emitting of bills of credit. But you know, they don't emit bills of credit. They don't print. Well, they print a lot, but they just create it by the computer. They can create $1 trillion a week if they want, and they literally did that. They generated $15 trillion worth of bailout money and credit during the crisis a few years ago. Not only did it bail out the people who didn't deserve to get bailed out in this country, they bailed out foreign banks and foreign countries and foreign central banks. And it's the monetary system that is at fault, and the burden falls on the American people. It falls especially on the middle class. It falls on the poor, and there's a transfer of wealth, and there's a transfer of power. It is not representative of what a republic is supposed to be. So we have to fight for and get people to understand that a true republic honors and respects individual liberty and sound money. Was given a responsibility to protect the value of the money, and they've been in business for 99 years right now, and they've lost 99% of the value of the dollar they have. That's not a very good record. And the other mandate the Fed has is they're supposed to maintain high employment. They haven't done very well there. But I think we should celebrate next year. I think we should have a bill and pass a bill. If I'm there, I'll be very glad to sign it. And that is the celebration of 100 years of the Federal Reserve. We're going to repeal the Federal Reserve Act. Along with the introduction of the method how they undermine the wealth of the middle class, whether it's through taxation or through inflation, it also introduced the age of endless wars, and we've been fighting wars ever since, but also the entitlement system. The entitlement system is something that we have to address, and it's been around for quite a bit, especially starting in the Depression, the Great Society, and now what we're getting now, it's endless. And it's not one party, it's a bipartisan effort. They sometimes tell me, well, you know, if you win the presidency, how are you going to bring groups together? How are you going to compromise? I said, I think that's our problem. We've been compromising too much. Both left and right get together and they fight the wars. Both right and left undermine our liberties. Both right and left spend too much money to run the welfare state. So what we need to do is bring coalitions together from the people who are on the left, don't like war and protect civil liberties. Bring the people together on the right and say, I like economic liberty and sound money. We need to bring the people together and change this back to what we used to have, and that was a true republic. System is something that is misnomered because entitlements sound like you deserve it, and I do believe that you know, under a system of what Jefferson talked about, you know, we have our rights. Our rights come to us in a natural way. We're you know, entitled to a right to our life and a right to our liberty. We ought to have a right and entitled to the fruits of our labor. But today, entitlement means that people, a certain segment of society, and it's nearly about half, that they are entitled to the wealth of the other half. And it doesn't work very well because right now there are more people entitled to the other half, and the other half is shrinking, and the wealth is dwindling, and the production is down. There's no other state in the country that probably understands it better. The jobs aren't here. The jobs are going overseas. In the last 10 years, there has been a 30 million increase in our population. Essentially no new manufacturing jobs. And we're now a debtor nation. Now you say, well, why didn't we have all this trouble 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago? We were so wealthy because a free society is the wealthiest society. We have the largest middle class. And it takes a long time to undermine and spend the wealth and borrow to the hilt. But we're at a different point now, because now with all the consumption without the production, we are a debtor nation. We're the biggest debtor nation in the history of the world. We owe more money to foreigners than any other country has. We owe international debt $16 trillion. We owe foreigners $3 trillion, and we can't pay the bills. It's a debt crisis. And you know what they think in Washington? Almost everybody, some talk differently, but if anybody was serious in Washington and understood this was a debt crisis, wouldn't you think they ought to cut something? You know, cut some spending? That I think in the very first year we should cut the budget by $1 trillion. Five departments and reverse our spending levels back about 5 years. Instead, they have projected increases forever and ever. So they talk a little bit about cutting, and they say, well, yeah, we spend too much here, too much there. So the Congress tries to do something, and they flunk, and they say, well, we'll have a super committee, dump it on the lap of the super committee, and they made a super mess out of the whole thing. They didn't do anything. But then there were some automatic cuts. The automatic cuts just sounds wonderful. $1.2 trillion, that used to be a lot of money. And they're going to cut $1.2 trillion out of the budget over the next 10 years, but we're not allowed to start until 2013. So that's how serious they are. But the cuts aren't cuts. The automatic budget increases are about $10.5 trillion over the next 10 years, and they're going to cut $1.2 trillion over the next 10 years of the proposed increases. But that's not a cut. It's just trying to modify a little bit the proposed increases. Now, just to show, that's $100 billion a year of proposed increases that they're going to cut. Our national debt is going up $100 billion a month. So it's not even anywhere close. So I don't think they have a sincere thought at all about cutting. And it's understandable because they have been taught that it's wrong. The Keynesian economic theory is that if you get into a recession, regardless of the cause, the answer is the people should spend more money and borrow more money. But what if you don't have a job? Or what if you maxed out on your credit cards? And what if you can barely make your payments? You can't spend more money. And they say, well, we have an answer for that. Then the government has to spend more money. Well, where's the government going to go? Well, we'll raise taxes. What if you can't raise taxes? That'll be a problem. Let's borrow more money. Well, there's a limit. Interest rates will go up if you borrow too much. Ah, they have a secret. We'll just print the money, and then we'll keep spending it. And that is supposed to be the solution. So they actually believe that it's absolutely necessary to spend more money under these conditions, and it's wrong to back off and save. But capital comes from saving. Capital doesn't come from increasing the money supply, and it's a major fallacy. If an individual is deeply in debt and living beyond their means, or if you're in a company and you're going bankrupt and you don't have anybody who's going to bail you out, you know you have to cut back. And if the debt is consuming you, there's no economic growth. So debt has to be liquidated. You have to get the prices back down. You have to get back to scratch and go back to work. An individual has to cut spending, sell a car, get another job, pay down the debt, then get back to economic growth again. But they don't believe that is true to government. I happen to believe that is true. If you live beyond your means as a nation, you'll live beneath your means. But the big problem is even if you could convince them, the politicians can't cut anything because everybody has a special interest. And for decades now, they have been rewarded. If they voted for the spending and they voted to bring something back home, they got rewarded and got reelected. But it's different now. The recessions were shorter-lived, and there was still some wealth, but we've undermined the system. We've undermined the dollar. We've undermined the principles. We're overextended just about everywhere, so it's not going to work. That's why this has to be addressed in a fundamental way. You can't tinker around the edges. You can't tinker and say we're going to cut the proposed increases. So we have to look at this entitlement system. The entitlement system doesn't work. The entitlement system is based on a presumption that we can help people who are having trouble. We don't want anybody to fall through the cracks. I think most of the people in Washington that vote for it are well-intended, but they have a lousy understanding of economics, is what I think the problem is. But they're well-intended. They say, well, we have to take care of people. I mean, what if somebody doesn't have medical care? Are you going to put them out in the streets? Well, I practiced medicine in early 1960s, and there was no Medicare or Medicaid, and I worked in a church hospital, and people weren't put out in the streets. But now it's different. People have this idea that if you need it, it's a right. If you demand it, it's a right. And if it's either one, it's an entitlement. So if you need medical care or demand it and somebody else has it, you have a right to it. Somebody has to provide it to you for free. If you need a house, they'll provide it for you. And look at what happened to the housing bubble. How about education? Oh yes, we'll loan them money or do whatever we can. So we have an educational system that is deeply flawed. Right now there are 600,000 jobs in this country going begging, but we don't have people trained for the job. So the educational system isn't doing well. So we graduate more students, but we graduate more students and they have $1 trillion of debt. There's more debt from the students than there are on credit cards. And guess what? Even the ones who are ready and anxious to pay their debt and get that behind them, they can't get a job. So all this entitlement system and this feeling that we can help people and give them something for free, there is nothing for free. What it does though is undermines the system. And we have lost confidence and faith, and we don't know the economic history, but it's an absolute fact that the freer a country, the wealthier the country. Conditions, the freer the country, the larger the middle class there is. And we did at one time have the largest middle class in the history of the world and the richest middle class. But that's not true anymore. If there is wealth around and you see it, believe me, there is debt behind it. And that's why it's unsustainable. So this is the reason we have to challenge it, whether it's for housing or education or whatever. The system is not working. I think that's why a lot of people are paying a lot more attention to the thoughts of personal liberty and economic liberty. But in medical care in particular, it's a real mess. I had experience of practicing medicine before we had it. And medicine has gotten much worse. And everything government has done has interfered with the doctor-patient relationship. And that is what should drive medicine, the doctor and the patient relationship. When that happened, the doctor, lo and behold, always charged the least. Now, when there's third-party payment, whether it's insurance companies or government or whatever, doctors, hospitals, everybody, the forms are filled out and they always charge the maximum because of the way the system is. The labs do it, the hospitals do it, and then because of the inflation, they never can pay their bills. And then the government comes in and they put price controls on it, and it becomes a real mess. And unless people get care under socialized medicine. Now, there's a lot of proposals going around. There was one that was introduced and passed in these last 3 years. I think it's called Obamacare or something like that. It solves no problems. It makes the problem worse. But what did the last administration do? Did they fight for free market medicine? No. They gave us prescription drug programs, which is insolvent. They're not paying the bills either. You know, well, we got to give free drugs to everybody. You know, it just goes on and on. And it's unsustainable. Medicare is in worse shape than Social Security, and it is not going to last. So I argue the case that we have to have priorities, we have to cut spending, but I haven't put on the top of my list of priorities that we cut medical care benefits for the elderly who have become dependent on the federal system, as well as children's health care. I don't think we should start with that, even though I don't think they should have been started. But now that there's dependent, we ought to be able to work our way out of it. But the only way we can do this, to preserve some of the medical care and to wean ourselves off, is to save the money someplace else. And of course, where I would start is saving hundreds of billions of dollars on the overseas spending. Is where now, to encourage more private medicine, there's things that we can do under these circumstances. There's all types of changes in the tax code that we could make, where if the individual would assume responsibility for themselves, that they get all their money back by taking a tax credit off their taxes and get the government out of the business of management. You know, these savings accounts are really worthwhile, but Obamacare and these other things just undermine that and make it more difficult. You're not allowed to have one if you're 65 and this sort of thing. But the system basically works, especially a young person. If you're a young person, you don't think you have to have medical care for every single thing or insurance for every single thing, and then the mandates the government puts on to include all kinds of things. Oh yeah, the insurance company have to take care of every single thing. Well, that's not insurance then. That's a mandate that eliminates the insurance quality. But if a young person had the chance of putting $3,000 or $4,000 or $5,000 in a bank account and got to write it off, and he uses that money directly to pay his bills and go directly to the doctor and stay out of the emergency room for those cares, it would be much better. Believe me, the prices would come down. You should have as much competition as possible, and the doctor-patient relationship is very important. But even in the practice of medicine, what they're having now with these changes going on, I mean, it costs thousands of dollars for the doctors to sign up and be able to coordinate all the medical information with the government. The government wants to know everything about a patient and the medications and find out exactly what the doctor's prescribing. They want to monitor, but is it wise physicians that are doing this monitoring? No, it's a bunch of bureaucrats over in Washington that are going to do this, and it's going to cost a lot of money, and there's going to be a lot more doctors getting very angry and upset with this. And I predict right now, if this continues, there's going to be a lot more doctors that won't take Medicare or Medicaid at all, compounding our problem. We need to get the relationship of the doctor and the patient back together again and get the government and the corporations out of the middle. To get our house in order and our financial house back on shape again, we do have to cut. But the overseas spending, which I talk about a whole lot, doesn't get cut unless we change our philosophy. We have to change our philosophy about the entitlement system. If nobody will consider the fact that we as individuals should be more responsible and not assume somebody else will take care of us from cradle to grave, that attitude, won't allow us to do the things necessary. We'll just get deeper and deeper into poverty. They'll keep spending it, and we're going to have runaway inflation. It's going to be a mess. That's why it's important that we address this. But there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to bring both liberals and conservatives, Republicans and Democrats and independents together about stopping all this spending and all these wars overseas. Why don't we agree to just bring our troops home? The wars that we have been fighting are fought with no declaration. Presidents make the decision. Congress defers to the executive branch and allows the president to do it. But I can promise you, as president, I would never fight a war that is not endorsed by the people through a vote by the Congress. A declaration. World War II, we were attacked by Japan and the Germans declared war against us. In less than 4 years, we were able to defeat both of them. And these were huge fights that we had to... We've been in Afghanistan for 10 years, and nobody knows when it's going to end. It keeps getting worse. And the more information we get out of, the more we are hearing from the military personnel, the more we find out that things aren't going well there. One indication, though, that should give a hint, but nobody outside of the people that might come to hear me will admit it, that is, the military people know exactly what I'm talking about, and they endorse this foreign policy about ending the war. They do that by sending more money to our campaign than 4 times more than all the Republicans put together and twice as much as the president gets. So that's a pretty strong indication that it also reflects the fact that maybe it helps a little bit, having served in the military for a few years myself. total of 5 years that I ended up serving when I was called, and I remember it very well because I was living in Detroit. I was in the middle of my residency. To leave, but I decided I better go, and so I went, and that was during the Cuban Missile Crisis. So I went and served and became a flight surgeon, and we moved to Texas for that. But at that time there was no declaration of war. You know, it just goes on, and then the presidents go to war. That was one of the things the revolution was fought about, because the king would declare the war and tax the colonists. And then the military came and occupied our country, and would go into their houses and occupy our houses. And matter of fact, they would go into houses without search warrants, just as our government's doing to us right now. And we should reject that. But the wars have been going on for so long, and nobody actually knows exactly why we're there. At least they don't tell us. Why were we in Iraq? Oh, because of weapons of mass destruction, because of Al-Qaeda. No weapons of mass destruction, no Al-Qaeda. And then we got in there. Guess what? Al-Qaeda's in Iraq right now, and they had no weapons of mass destruction. Now Iraq is more aligned with Iran. You know, and they're more allies because just of the politics of the nature that we have too many unintended consequences of these things that we do around the world, just as it is in economics. Unintended consequences. We want to do good for people, we end up doing bad for the people. And going. They tell us they're supposed to do this, you know, for the benefit of the people, but it really doesn't work. There's a lot of other special interests involved. There's a lot of special interests, from oil to wars that have been going on forever across the world, and the countries end up much worse shape, and we end up much more broke, and that is a big problem. So I'm for saving a lot of money from overseas and having a foreign policy of non-intervention, one the Constitution provides for, something the founders advised for us to do, and that is be friends with people, even if they're different and even if they aren't perfect. Washington in the debates, I said, when we're perfect, maybe we can lecture those other countries about their civil liberties. But we should certainly have a different foreign policy. What they usually say to me and to any others who would agree, they say that we're a bunch of isolationists. But it really isn't. That is not what the founders wanted. They did not want to have, you know, protectionism. They wanted to isolate our weapons. They didn't want to be aggressive with weapons, but they wanted to trade and be friends with people, practice diplomacy. You know, we have thousands and thousands of diplomats in Washington and around the world. I just wish they would be used once in a while. You know, there was one other president, there's been several others that had military experience, but the one most recently that had the most was, of course, Eisenhower. And he had very strong advice when he left. He says, watch out for the military-industrial complex. They may be promoting wars just to sell weapons. And boy, there is a lot of activity and a lot of credibility to that argument. But Eisenhower, you know, was elected. He was elected to stop a war. Generally, the people, when they get the choice, they will pick the person that is least likely to start a war. And that happened last go around, but the first thing happened is we expanded the war in Afghanistan. But Eisenhower was elected. He was to stop the war. He said he'd go to Korea. He did that, and the war stopped. Not one more military person died after that during the Eisenhower administration of the whole 8 years. And he had a lot of opportunities to put in the troops. But he was a military man. He knew what it was like. And I just think he was more skeptical of this rapid response by putting troops in. Dien Bien Phu fell. The French were defeated there. And it wasn't until the next administration that the troops went in. But Eisenhower said, no, I'm not going to send the troops in there. There was a crisis in the Taiwan Straits, and that had to do with Taiwan in the Formosa area and China. He says, I'm not going to get involved in that. Let them deal with that. And I remember another time when Eisenhower was restrained, and that was in 1956, and that was during the Suez Crisis. The French and the British were over there, and they were going to make sure the Egyptians didn't take over the canal, so the French and the British and the Israelis were fighting, and they said, Eisenhower, you got to come in and help us because we're not doing so well. And Eisenhower said no. That was the day I said, boy, I'm glad of that. I was afraid I was going to be drafted right out of college on that. But Eisenhower, I thought, set a great precedent about how to be restrained. And today, though, we hear some of the other candidates, they do not sound very restrained. They sound like they're itching for a fight. I'll tell you what, I'm not itching for a fight, but we need to defend this country as necessary. If we have to, we fight and win. That we don't need it for our national defense. Our national security is not in threat, and our financial situation is so bad. The last thing we need is to be sending troops and get further involved, because we're already involved in all those countries over there, further involved in Syria. It makes no sense whatsoever to get involved there because there's too many. That are so anxious because they're anxious actually to go to Iran. Now that is about the most foolish thing in the world. You know, obviously some of the reason that we get involved over there has to do with Israel. And of course we propped up a dictator. We've tried to buy friendship with Israel in Egypt. Spent about $40 billion. What happened? It didn't work. The people finally rejected it. Threw out that guy. Guess what? Al-Qaeda's in Egypt now. They're in Libya now. So this thing backfires on us. I think it hurts Israel, to tell you the truth. I think Israel can take care of themselves. They have nuclear weapons and powerhouse. But unfortunately, I think it backfires on them because they can't do anything without our permission, and they can't have peace treaties with their neighbors. And if they want to fight, if they think they have to have a border dispute, I think it should be their business and make their decisions. But this idea that we have to be trapped, and we have to pay the bills, and we have to be vulnerable, I just don't think it's the right way to do it. 9/11, of course, that was used as an easy excuse to do a lot of things they had been planning on doing. In 1998, the policy of this country changed to that of overthrowing Saddam Hussein. Because I remember talking about it on the House floor in 1998 and the lack of wisdom about going in there. But that finally came about. But when did it come about? After 9/11. 9/11 came. It was a terrible, terrible day. And we should wake us all up. But the one thing that I was convinced of then, and I can remain completely convinced, we were not attacked because we are free and rich. I do not believe that. It involves a deeply flawed foreign policy. But what was the first reaction? And I have pretty good evidence that the early discussion, matter of fact, even Paul O'Neill, the Secretary of the Treasury, was astounded at the first meeting of the White House under Bush in the year 2001 was, when are we going into Iraq? Well, when 9/11 occurred, they were ready to go. And it had nothing to do with 9/11. And it took, what, 10 years to get bin Laden? And yet they occupied two more countries, and 8,500 Americans died. We spent $4 trillion that accumulated into our debt. That was used as an excuse. Just as these conditions of war are used as an excuse for constant intrusion into our personal privacy and our personal liberties here at home. It was within days after 9/11 that a bill was brought to the floor. That bill had been floating around for quite a few years. And they brought it up and passed it. It was an hour or so of discussion. And that was that infamous Patriot Act. The Patriot Act...
patriotic.
Not very patriotic. It's a disaster. It destroyed essentially our Fourth Amendment rights. Now they can come into our houses without search warrant, and it's not getting much better. And it's also the authority used to intrude on our personal privacy and the so-called protection that they give us under the TSA at the airports. But it also, what it does though, it allows searches and seizures without proper search warrants. So this makes people who look a little bit different more vulnerable. This has an immigration connotation. People coming into this country, they look different, and they're going to be more vulnerable because they don't have to get proper search warrants. But the Patriot Act is very, very damaging. And it has led to other things too. Today, of course, we've had the president announce 1 year ago that he's allowed to assassinate American citizens just because he might be thought to be associated with somebody who might be a bad guy. I mean, associated forces. And of course, he's done it on 3 occasions, 3 assassinations of American citizens without real charges, without any charges. But he declared that they were the enemy of the country, and therefore this was the best thing to do. And then again, with the National Defense Authorization Act, the president can use the military to arrest anybody. And this means anybody, but there have to be associated forces, but nobody knows how to define it. But that is interpreted to mean by many, oh, associated means, you mean if I visit a web page, or I get certain email, or I attend a certain meeting, or I speak out, or I write a book, and it sounds like it's subversive, that you can be arrested by the military and put in prison indefinitely without a trial? I mean, this is very serious. This is the undermining the basic principles of a true republic. So I believe very sincerely, for our republic to survive, those laws have to be removed from the book. I think the problems are great, and the people are recognizing the conditions of this country are so different from 5 years ago, but in many ways in a positive way. Today, this message of liberty is much better received than ever before, because people know we're in an economic crisis and there are big problems, and they know they're sick and tired of the wars, and the foreign policy is deeply flawed. And believe it or not, the overwhelming majority of the American people now are demanding an audit of the Federal Reserve System. That is encouraging, and I am very encouraged by the different groups coming together and looking at these. They're by far not just Republicans, because I have to do a little converting with some of the Republicans now and then myself. But they're independents, there's Democrats, there are Republicans that are coming together. The people who are sincere and believe in the Constitution are coming together. And I see this as very, very positive. And I'm really excited by the number of young people. The college campuses are alive and well, I'll tell you. Ideas do have consequences. Bad ideas have bad consequences, so therefore you compete with them with good ideas to compensate for the bad ideas under which we've been living, especially the economic and deeply flawed monetary policy and the foreign policy. But ideas are very, very important. And the idea of liberty reminds me of the saying that an idea whose time has come cannot be stopped by armies, and it cannot be squelched by government. So the right ideas will prevail. I believe that is what's happening in this country today, and they will not silence us. Samuel Adams said that it doesn't take a majority. A lot of people worry. They say, well, it's just a minority. You don't have 51%. Prevailing attitudes are important, and people have to go along. But most of the people tend to be followers. But it's usually a smaller group. It was a smaller group that led our revolution. And it was a small group that works on the other end. It was a small group that led the communist revolution too. And too often the people come along. Now, in the positive sense that what Samuel Adams said, that it doesn't require a majority, but it requires a minority, an irate minority, and a tireless minority willing to work diligently spreading brush fires of liberty in the minds of men. And that is what we need to do. Liberty is that if your goal in life is similar to mine, and I think our goal should be seeking virtue and excellence in our own lives to get our own satisfaction. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be wealthy to do that. Excellence and virtues are very, very important. And if governments decide, yes, that's a good idea, we're going to make you a virtuous person, and we're going to have you do this, and we're going to make the world more virtuous, and we're going to use force to do it, it's a complete failure. Once the government embarks on that goal, it destroys liberty. And that's what they've been doing. Governments have assumed that they can protect all of us from ourselves, like any mistakes that we made. But when governments encroach on that very personal thing about how we want to run our lives, then they get involved in religious values and personal values and economic matters, and there's nothing left. So if you want to have that goal, we have to struggle to protect those principles of liberty. And we were given this. We were given the greatest amount of liberty ever and the richest ever. This was a great test, and now we're letting it slide by unless we revive that and restore the Constitution and restore the Republic is what we need. The concept of liberty is an issue that I've read and studied about and thought about, and I think it answers so many questions. Obviously not all the questions, because there's always going to be some problems. But turning so much over to government, whether it's housing or medical care or how we live, it just leads to more trouble. But if you understand the concept of liberty, and liberty is our own, and we have rights and we have responsibilities. But it should not be divisive. It shouldn't. Some people shouldn't want liberty for one reason, but not the other. Somebody else wants it for this reason, but not this. Why can't it be both social liberty, religious liberty, as well as economic liberty? It should bring us all together. Is that those who don't want economic liberty said that some people will fall through the cracks and they need us to reorganize the whole economic system. Others will say, well, if you're allowed to do whatever you want, somebody's going to do something that I abhor. They might not practice good personal habits, and they might do things I don't endorse. Well, that's one thing that you would have to accept in a free society. If they don't hurt other people, I mean, just think in religion. We accept people with different religious values, but we don't have to endorse religious values of everybody. Some people don't even have religious values. But if they're not going to go out and hurt people, I mean, what are you going to do about it? You can't change their minds. And that's the way it is on personal habits. But we've been tempted so much over the many, many decades that we're going to mold people's behavior, both domestically and internationally. And all we do is we use force, and it backfires on us. You know, if we want to mold the world, if we want to show that we're an exceptional nation, let's be an exceptional nation. Let's set a standard for it. Society and sound money, and we have prosperity, we protect civil liberties, and we understand about how people tend to come together under the banner of freedom, and we have a foreign policy that defends this country, and we don't meddle in the affairs of others. Maybe people would want to emulate us. Just think, though, over these many years of the bombs haven't been dropped and all the force, whether it was in Korea or Vietnam and all these places in the Middle East, and it's all backfiring and bankrupting us, it would be so much better. I can't help but think about those years I was in the military. I never had to go to Vietnam, but it was so fruitless. It lasted so long, and so many people died. And then finally we lost. We had to come home. We lost 60,000 military personnel. And we finally came home. And guess what? The world in the Far East didn't go communist. They came more westernized when we didn't use force. And now we trade with Vietnam. We travel there. We invest there. They come over here. Just think of what has been... success of what was achieved in peace that could never have been achieved with war. We need to have more confidence in the peaceful mission. Benjamin Franklin said, those who expect to reap the benefits of liberty must undergo the fatigue of supporting it. I don't think you have to use the word sacrifice. I don't think fighting for liberty is a lot of sacrifice. Even economically speaking, everybody say, you really have to sacrifice if you're going to get our house in order. No, the people who live beyond their means, who got themselves into bankruptcy, they should go bankrupt. You shouldn't have to suffer. You should be able to keep your life. Business or whatever, and we deregulate society and get the Fed off our backs and out of our pockets and get rid of the income tax, that I don't think is a sacrifice. I think that would be a real blessing. We are challenged, and I'm an optimist now as I travel the country, and compared to 5 years ago, the country is much more alert, they're much more enthusiastic. I think this young generation will make a difference, but we need to band together. We can't always say now, well, if we keep doing this, we're going to pass all these problems on to the next generation. I don't think we can say that anymore. I think it's this generation right now, it's us, it's for our business to get busy and restore